I've always believed in logic. Physics, biology, chemistry, all of it made sense. Every effect had a cause. Every phenomenon could be traced to particles, pressure, or perception. I lived by that, until one specific day in Dharamshala changed everything. I was in India for what I told my colleagues was a digital detox. The truth, I was burned out. Years of working in high-frequency trading had fried my nerves. Constant screen time, artificial light, caffeine instead of sleep. I was efficient, not alive. The mountains offered silence. My hostel overlooked a cliff that dropped into a valley lined with prayer flags and pine trees. Most days, I just sat, drank cheap tea, and read Murakami novels. That's when I met Dorj. He was maybe 60, maybe 90. It was hard to tell. His posture was curled like a question mark, and yet his presence was straight like a blade. He didn't speak much, just smiled. But every morning, at the exact same time, he would go to the stone platform behind the hostel and sit. And I mean sit. Still, for hours. One morning, around 4:50 a.m., I had a terrible migraine. Not new for me, but this one felt like thunder cracking behind my eyes. I stepped outside, hoping the cold air would numb the pain. Dorj was already there, sitting. What happened next? I've replayed 1,000 times. He opened his eyes, slowly, and looked at me. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But as our eyes locked, the pressure in my skull, which felt like it was about to explode, just disappeared, vanished. No pills, no massage, no placebo. It was gone. I must have looked confused because he finally spoke. "Mind is stronger than matter," he said. That was all. And he went back to sitting. I stood there, the morning mist curling around my feet, thinking, what just happened? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the fresh air helped. Maybe I imagined the pain. Maybe anything but what I had just experienced. But that moment burrowed into me. When I got back to London, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I began searching, not for spiritual answers, but scientific ones. I needed an explanation that didn't involve energy fields or auras. That's when I came across a declassified CIA document from the 1970s. It described remote influence experiments, subjects attempting to influence distant objects or people using only mental intention. And buried in the footnotes was a name I hadn't heard before, Project Stargate. I was hooked. That was the beginning. I didn't believe it either, not until I saw the footage. It started when I stumbled upon a grainy video from the 1970s, filmed by a French ethnographer visiting a remote Tibetan monastery. The camera shook as it zoomed in on a group of monks meditating half-naked in the freezing Himalayan wind. Around them, snow was piled in thick layers. But as they began to chant, something unbelievable happened. The snow started to melt. Steam rose from their robes. No fire, no heat source. Just breath, willpower, and something else I couldn't name. I thought it had to be staged. But then I found more. Tummo meditation, a real, documented practice in Tibetan Buddhism. It teaches monks to generate inner heat through breath control and visualization. Harvard Medical School even studied it in the 1980s. Dr. Herbert Benson measured temperature increases of up to 17 degrees Fahrenheit on the subject's fingertips and toes during extended meditation. He published his results. Peer-reviewed. Verified. So this wasn't folklore, it was science. But what really shook me was the testimony of CIA analyst Douglas Valentine, who later wrote that U.S. intelligence agents stationed near Tibet during the Cold War reported unexplainable physical feats by monks. Wounds healing faster than normal, walking barefoot on sharp stones for miles, and even influencing the behavior of wild animals. And then came the rumor, whispered in the margins of declassified documents, that one monk had stopped his heart for an entire minute and returned. Was it real? Hard to say. But for the first time in my life, I began to believe the body wasn't just a machine. It was programmable, trainable, manipulatable, not from the outside, but from within. And if Tibetan monks could do that in silence, hidden in mountains, what else was possible? I thought the Tibetan accounts were strange enough, but when I stumbled upon the writings of French mystic R.A. Schwaller de Lubbock's, who spent over 15 years studying the Temple of Luxor in Egypt, things took a turn. He described the temple not just as a monument, but as a living organism, constructed with a precision that mirrored the human body. Chakras, proportions, even energetic flows. He wasn't alone. Early explorers, Egyptologists, and even military intelligence reports from World War II hinted at a deeper function for Egyptian temples and pyramids. Something beyond tombs and ceremonial halls. Rituals not for the dead, but the living. Hieroglyphs often depict priests with ankhs and staffs, standing between massive stone pillars, arms raised in postures eerily similar to modern Qigong and Tai Chi positions. The rituals weren't static. They involved chanting frequencies, precise body movements, and sound amplification chambers that used the resonance of granite to generate vibrational fields. The ancient Egyptians believed in the Ka, the life force, and the Ba, the personality spirit. Their temples were tools to channel energy, purify intentions, and align the soul with cosmic patterns. But here's the strange part. In 1997, a study conducted using ground-penetrating radar in the Great Pyramid revealed heat anomalies in the walls. Some researchers believe this suggests ongoing energy activity in a structure that is supposedly thousands of years old and inactive. Pyramids as resonators? Dr. Vyacheslav Zganek, a hydrogen scientist, noted that the Great Pyramid may sit on a unique hydrogen-rich aquifer. When water flows beneath, the pyramid could behave like a natural generator, a resonant energy machine, transmitting not electricity, but something more subtle. Scalar energy? Torsion fields? These ideas sound fringe until you realize multiple countries, including the USSR, quietly launched pyramid research programs during the Cold War. They built fiberglass pyramids and studied the effects on seed germination, immune response, and even human EEG patterns. Guess what? Results showed enhanced growth, improved immunity, and mental clarity. Reports were buried, but a few surfaced in obscure physics journals before vanishing again. Ancient texts, modern correlations. In the Book of the Dead, we find references to ascending with light, becoming a pillar, and unlocking the gates of energy. These aren't metaphors. They're operational instructions. Initiates were trained to use breath, sound, and inner stillness to become a god, not in mythology, but through precise spiritual energetic transformation. Even the Benben stone, placed at the top of pyramids, was said to be a stone that fell from heaven. Its shape, identical to today's depiction of the pineal gland, the so-called seat of consciousness. The sealed chambers. Many pyramid shafts remain unexplored, blocked by limestone plugs or too narrow for human entry. In 2017, scientists discovered a massive hidden void above the Grand Gallery inside the Great Pyramid. Theories range from structural balance to an initiatory chamber that affects consciousness through frequency isolation and sensory deprivation. Some suspect that initiation in such chambers was used to teach ancient priests how to manipulate internal energy fields, just like Tibetan monks later claimed to do. Unexplained global parallels. And this isn't isolated to Egypt. Across the world, in Mexico, Cambodia, Peru, we see megalithic structures aligned with stars, echoing the same proportions, acoustics, and even geometry as Egyptian temples. All built by cultures with no contact, yet echoing the same principles. Coincidence or lost science? As I compared the monks in the Himalayas to priests in the Nile Valley, it became clear the ancients were not primitive. They were engineers of subtle forces, using body, sound, geometry, and stone to interact with energy most of us can't even perceive. The next clue. It came from the unlikeliest place, a declassified KGB file buried in the Soviet archives. By the time I hit my early 20s, I had developed a habit. Anytime I came across something strange, something that made me question the boundaries of what's real and what's myth, I wrote it down. One particular entry, scribbled in the margins of an old notebook, simply read, CIA Stargate, remote viewing, Project Grill Flame. Why? I didn't remember where I first heard it. Maybe an offhand podcast mention, maybe a conspiracy forum post that felt a little too convincing. But the words never left me. Years later, that scribble would open a rabbit hole that would change the way I view every institution of power. It began with a declassified document from the CIA's own archives. Yes, public. You can find it. It's titled, Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process. Date, 1983. Author, U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonnell. The paper reads like science fiction, except it's not. It outlines a military-backed exploration into altered states of consciousness and out-of-body experiences. It connects quantum theory, consciousness, and brainwave synchronization in ways that, frankly, don't sound like any military memo you'd expect. They were trying to weaponize the mind. The deeper I dug, the more I found myself between two parallel tracks of history, one that was public and one that was hidden behind clearance levels. From 1970 to the early 2000s, the U.S. government poured millions into psychic research. Project Stargate, Project Center Lane, Grill Flame, Sunstreak. These weren't just fringe operations. They were funded by the Defense Intelligence Agency, DI, and supported by figures in the NSA, CIA, and Army intelligence. Their goal? Train individuals to see targets anywhere in the world, from Soviet nuclear silos to encrypted military plans, without ever leaving the room. They called it remote viewing. The twist: they weren't the first. Soviet Russia was years ahead. Back in the 1960s, the KGB and other Soviet branches began conducting formal experiments into psychotronics, their term for the relationship between energy fields and human consciousness. Their belief that the brain emits measurable fields that can influence physical systems, including the human body, matter, and even other minds. They ran controlled tests, placing subjects in Faraday cages to isolate electromagnetic interference, tracking physiological changes in targets when remote viewers focused on them, attempting to kill lab animals remotely through sheer intent. Insane? Maybe. But they published results, and the CIA took notice. There was a silent race behind the Iron Curtain. While the West was building nukes and the Soviets were launching satellites, both were secretly investing in what one memo called the subtle wars, battles fought not with guns, but with frequency, intention, and will. And then came the transfer programs, some of the most mysterious figures in Cold War history. Defectors, double agents, and retired operatives whispered of sessions where psychics sat in cold government basements, guided into trances, and tasked with finding enemy secrets using only a coordinate and a name. And according to redacted files, some of them succeeded. But the real question wasn't if it worked. It was what else they found. One now famous remote viewing session from 1984 asked a subject to view a location on Mars in 1 million BC. The viewer described tall beings, pyramids, and a dying civilization reaching for contact. Why would a military experiment care about that? And why, after decades of funding, was the Stargate project suddenly terminated, right after its data was reviewed by unknown private contractors? Today, many laugh when they hear terms like psychic soldier or mental influence. But the documents exist, the funding existed, and the effort wasn't abandoned. It was just outsourced. Some of the individuals trained under Stargate went on to consult for Silicon Valley giants, defense contractors, and biofeedback tech startups. Meanwhile, those old notebooks of mine, they're filling up again, because the more I trace the timeline of energy manipulation, the more it becomes clear. The monks knew, the priests knew, and now the intelligence agencies know too. The only question left is, what are they doing with that knowledge now? They used to call it magic. Now they call it field theory. But the line between consciousness and matter is beginning to blur, and some of the brightest scientific minds are no longer laughing. After reading declassified CIA memos, I wanted more than just shadows. I needed hard science. So I dug deep, not into conspiracy blogs, but into peer-reviewed journals, physics symposiums, neuroscience papers. And what I found shocked me more than any urban legend ever could. Let's start with this name. Dr. Dean Radin, former researcher at Princeton, SRI International, and chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. In dozens of controlled lab experiments, Radin and his team demonstrated that focused human attention, especially during meditative or altered states, could statistically alter the behavior of quantum systems. Yes, literally change the results of double-slit experiments. Particles acted differently when people were watching with focused intention. Skeptics laughed, so they repeated the experiments, and the results held. Then there was Dr. William Tiller, former Stanford materials science professor. He showed that experienced meditators could influence the pH level of water, the crystallization of materials, and even biological growth rates, all without touching the system. His theory? That consciousness leaves a charge in physical space, a kind of imprint, not unlike static electricity, that can alter future interactions with matter. You don't need to understand quantum decoherence to feel the implications. If true, this changes everything, not just in physics, but in medicine, psychology, and even geopolitics. And now, mainstream science is catching up. Neuroscientists studying monks and long-term meditators discovered something they didn't expect. Gamma brainwaves sustained for minutes at a time, a neural coherence across hemispheres, biological markers of age reversal, immune boosts, and even changes in epigenetic expression. It's not anecdotal anymore. The Harvard Benson Henry Institute, for example, published data showing that meditation and prayer could switch off inflammatory genes and activate healing pathways in just minutes. Again, consciousness-altering matter. Meanwhile, companies like HeartMath began researching the electromagnetic field generated by the human heart. Their discovery? The heart has a measurable, rhythmic EM field that extends up to 3 feet outside the body. And more than that, when two people sit in silence, that rhythm can sync. It's called entrainment, one field aligning with another, like tuning forks, like whispers in the dark. But here's where it gets weird, really weird. Researchers at Stanford and Princeton, under the PEAR Lab, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, ran experiments for over 25 years with random number generators. They found that during global events, major disasters, terrorist attacks, or even large spiritual gatherings, those machines showed non-random behavior. It's as if human emotion, focused attention, or collective trauma could ripple through the field and alter machines across the world. It's not proof, but it is a signal. Remember the Tibetan teachings from earlier? They spoke of consciousness as a force, not an illusion, not a side effect of biology, a primary substance. The Egyptian priests said the same. They built temples not just with stone, but with intention, sacred geometry, vibrations, sound, energy. And now, scientists like Rupert Sheldrake are proposing morphic fields, organizing forces that guide the formation of biology, habits, even memory itself. Wild, yes, but less wild than believing thoughts are just electric noise inside a skull. So why are these findings still fringe? Why aren't we taught this in school? Why do we treat energy as woo-woo, while literally using energy fields to describe physical phenomena every day? Here's a guess. If your consciousness can influence reality, then you are not powerless. If your thoughts have mass, then so do your fears, and so do your hopes. And that makes you and me very hard to control. And suddenly, all those CIA experiments, Soviet psychotronics, and monk demonstrations begin to align. They weren't studying parlor tricks. They were mapping a battlefield we forgot existed. A war over belief, over focus, over what we are truly capable of. And what if the biggest secret of all isn't hidden in documents or tombs, but in the part of your mind you've been told to ignore? We live in an age where data is abundant, but understanding is rare, where we can stream quantum physics lectures on our phones, but are told that intention is pseudoscience. Why? Why are monks on YouTube showing how to raise body temperature with breath control, while your biology teacher still insists the mind is just an emergent property of neurons? Why were millions spent by the CIA and KGB to explore remote viewing, energy manipulation, and consciousness warfare, only for those programs to be buried under decades of denial? Here's what I found. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The doctrine of materialism. There's a story you were told in school, that matter is primary, that consciousness is a byproduct of neurons firing, that everything that exists can be weighed, measured, isolated, and controlled. It sounds clean, predictable, logical, and it's useful for machines. But it's also a doctrine, handed down like a religion, taught as fact, despite cracks forming everywhere. Cracks like the observer effect in quantum mechanics, non-local entanglement across vast distances, placebo effect stronger than some drugs, the fact that no one knows how consciousness actually emerges from the brain. Still, we're told, don't ask, just consume. But why suppress other models? Control requires predictability. A system built on profit, surveillance, and manipulation only works when people believe they're predictable. If consciousness is just brain chemistry, then emotions can be medicated, desires can be monetized, beliefs can be engineered. But if consciousness can shape matter, if human intent can influence reality, then every human is a variable. Every focused mind is a wild card, and wild cards don't belong in algorithmic societies. The paper trail. In 1995, the CIA declassified part of its Stargate program, confirming that it had spent over 20 years researching remote viewing and psychic espionage. The official conclusion? Inconclusive. But in the same documents, we find confirmations that some of the results were statistically significant, far beyond chance. So why end the program? Ask Congressman Charlie Rose, who once said, "We've spent over $20 million on psychic research. If it didn't work, why did we keep funding it for 2 decades?" Now consider MKUltra, another project dismissed for years as a conspiracy. Until it wasn't. Truth doesn't always get buried. Sometimes it gets filed under layers of noise. The shift they couldn't stop. Despite suppression, something began to shift. Yoga studios opened in every city. Meditation apps exploded. Millions began experiencing altered states, no longer through gurus, but headphones and breath work. Some call it spiritual. Others call it hacking the nervous system. Either way, the gate was open, and quietly, major institutions followed. The U.S. Army began testing mindfulness training for soldiers. Fortune 500 CEOs attended silent retreats. Ivy League researchers studied how trauma and belief rewire the brain. The taboo was softening, but still, the real implications remained unspoken. That consciousness might be a field, and you are not just a product of biology, but a node in a much larger network. Why you weren't told? Because you're easier to sell to when you feel small. Easier to manage when you think thoughts are meaningless. Easier to suppress when you don't believe focus has power. The secret isn't in some ancient scroll. It's in what happens when millions of people start believing they're not just passengers in reality, but participants. If the mind can influence biology, if belief can affect machines, if consciousness can travel across space and time, then you are not a victim. You are not a static identity. You are a transmitter, a receiver, a creator. And once that spreads, really spreads, no system built on fear, control, or conformity can survive. It's one thing to dismiss monks, mystics, or ancient priests. It's another to find Ivy League professors, military officers, and Silicon Valley elites quietly walking the same path in the shadows. And once you know what to look for, you start seeing the fingerprints. The Ivy League labyrinth. In the late 1990s, a team at Princeton University ran an obscure project called PAIR, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Program. Their goal? To test whether human intention could affect physical systems. Their method? Random number generators sealed in labs. Their results? Statistically significant deviations, again and again, correlated with focused thought. The mainstream reaction? Laughter, mockery, silence. But the data never went away, and neither did the people behind it. Some went on to influence defense think tanks, AI ethics panels, and neuroscience institutes. They stopped talking about energy. They started using terms like neuroplasticity, biofeedback, and non-local cognition. Same ideas, new packaging, military experiments, and what they learned. While the world laughed at psychic warfare, the military kept experimenting. In 1983, the U.S. Army published a now declassified document titled Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process. It reads like a mashup of quantum mechanics, meditation, and metaphysics. Inside, the report outlines how sound frequencies, breathing techniques, and focused intent could alter consciousness, even access higher information fields. This wasn't a blog post. This was an Army intelligence study. The conclusion? That human consciousness can leave the body, access information beyond time, and potentially interact with other forms of intelligence. And then nothing. The program went silent. But its graduates? They didn't. They became contractors, consultants, advisors to governments and private firms. The trail never vanished. It just moved behind NDAs, tech gurus, and consciousness hacking. In recent years, another group joined the search. Tech elites. Not monks, not mystics, but founders, engineers, AI pioneers. Some quietly began funding research into brain-computer interfaces, consciousness simulation models, extended cognition systems. Elon Musk famously stated, "We're already cyborgs. The smartphone is an extension of our mind." But behind the transhumanist language is a familiar pattern, trying to map, replicate, and eventually control the human mind's power. Others took a different route. Startups like Neuralink began exploring how intention could drive machines. Apps like Muse, Waking Up, and Luminate offer ways to tune brainwaves. And deep inside conferences like TED, Burning Man, and Singularity University, ideas once dismissed as woo-woo are presented with data slides. The language changed, but the search remained the same. Education rewritten. Quietly, even schools began shifting. Mindfulness is now taught in classrooms. Meditation is offered in prisons. Breathwork is used in trauma recovery. And on TikTok, Gen Z is teaching each other how to access flow states, use mirror gazing, or understand energy centers. With no religious framing. It's not perfect, but the awareness is spreading. And that's the one thing no system has figured out how to stop. Patterns across time. Ancient priests spoke of divine breath and sacred geometry. Monks chanted to generate internal heat and levitate stones. Alchemists claimed inner transformation shaped outer matter. Scientists in the 20th century confirmed intention affects random generators. The military mapped the journey of consciousness through altered states. And now, kids on YouTube show how to enter theta with a beat. This isn't a coincidence. It's a continuum, a trail of breadcrumbs through centuries, cultures, and codes, each left just enough for those willing to see. And the next part of this story? It's not about what they did. It's about what you can now do. At the end of all these trails, through dusty manuscripts, declassified reports, chanting monks, and encrypted military memos, you're left with one final, uncomfortable truth. They feared you would find this, not because it's dangerous, but because it's liberating. The power was never external. All the distractions, all the systems, all the rituals and symbols and protocols were just elaborate ways to externalize something that was always internal. The consciousness capable of influencing matter, it wasn't just in a monk, or a lab technician, or a priest in gold robes. It was always in you. They feared you'd realize that focused thought, intention, and coherence could influence your body's healing, affect machines and patterns, reshape your emotional state, even impact probability, not in a mystical, floating crystals kind of way, but in a way that science was starting to quantify. Just as the data was being buried, the real heresy wasn't belief in magic. It was the understanding that mind creates form. And once you grasp that, systems of control begin to wobble. Why they buried the research? Why did governments shut down promising programs? Why were CIA and KGB files redacted beyond recognition? Why were scientists laughed out of academia for studying consciousness? Because if the average person understood the mechanics of their own mind, how belief reshapes biology, how intention shapes experience, how coherence can unlock intuition and insight, then advertising doesn't work the same. Propaganda doesn't hold. Fear loses its grip. And most of all, dependence dies. You wouldn't need a priest, a pill, or a politician. You'd begin to take your power back. And that was the true threat. Everything is fractal. Look closely at the systems built around you. Education taught obedience, not intuition. Medicine treated symptoms, not roots. Religion externalized the divine. Politics divided the collective. Entertainment numbed the mind. And yet, in each, a mirror remained. A place where those who still remembered The mystics, the quiet scientists, the rebels, the dreamers, hid clues in fairy tales, in forgotten symbols, in startup slideshows, in Reddit threads. They couldn't erase the truth, so they fragmented it. Your job was to remember. And now, you've heard the stories. You've followed the threads. From the monks of Tibet, to the priests of Egypt, to the generals in bunkers, to the billionaires with brain scans. You've seen how the same truth was encoded again and again. Consciousness isn't passive. It's a force, a tool, a bridge. And you, yes you, are holding it every single day. The question is, will you use it? Will you stay blind, entertained, obedient? Or will you sit, breathe, focus, and remember what your ancestors always knew? The power was never lost, only hidden. Now that you've seen the evidence, the rituals, the research, the history, there's only one thing left to do. Use it.